Hi all, and most welcome to this lecture with Professor and Dr. Jim Cummins. My name is Maria Henriksson, and I am the Regional Manager for our Nordic markets. Binogi, formerly known as Studi, is a digital multilingual tool for learning in school in many subjects and many languages. Binogi is a part of the research project, the language project, Språkprojektet. We started as a digital learning material 2011 and converted to a research project with Binogi in 2015. And today about 60% of Sweden's students and teachers have access to Binogi. If you want to learn more about us, please visit us in our booth. And you will not be able to ask questions during this lecture. However, we have a meet and greet with Mr. Cummins at between 2 and 3 in our booth. And what is good to know is that Jim has been very generously, he has said that we can share his presentation, and you will find it in our homepage, binogi.se, maybe next week or something at the end of this week. So you can access the whole presentation afterwards. Thank you for that. So in 2017, we met Canadian organizations in Sweden, and they said, come and visit. When we prepared for the trip, we also heard, you must talk to the best of the best when it comes to multilingual research, Professor Jim Cummins. And 19th of October 2017, we had a meeting with Professor Cummins, who validated us and our material. We were on the right track. And we became very close to Jim and his team to make sure that we kept on developing our material and to make sure also our platform really made a difference for students and for their learning. The other day when we planned this, I said, it feels like we're having a family member, a friend, and a rock star at the same time as our prominent guest today. So let me now introduce you to Dr. Jim Cummins. Jim Cummins is a professor and researcher at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education of the University of Toronto. His research focuses on literacy development in educational context characterized by linguistic diversity and has been influential in establishing the theoretical foundation underlying effective schooling for multilingual and immigrant background students. His most recent book, published in August 2021, is Rethinking the Education of Multilingual Learners, a critical analysis of theoretical concepts. I am immensely grateful and proud to present to you Professor and Dr. Jim Cummins.
Great. Thanks, Marie. First of all, let me just thank Binogi and the Gothenburg Book Fair for the opportunity to be here. Just walking around the book fair this morning, there's such a tremendous sense of energy, enthusiasm about books and about literacy that it's incredibly encouraging, especially in light of some of the things that I'm going to say today in terms of the challenges that we have in our schools in many parts of the world where literacy is seen as being almost dangerous. And critical literacy is something that is fought against by many politicians and by top-down interests. And so the issues that I want to focus on are what is education all about? What should we be trying to do educationally, given the kinds of realities that our societies are experiencing? So let me initially just give you a brief overview of what I'm going to say. Because I'm probably not going to get through all of the content that's in the presentation, and so I apologize in advance that I'll go over some stuff quite quickly, just so as I can get the main message that I want to communicate out. But and as Maria said, the full presentation will be available in a short while through the Binogi site. So in terms of what I want to highlight is that given the multiple threats to human existence from climate change, environmental disasters, global conflicts, unprecedented movement of populations, and pervasive disinformation on social media, we need to ask what kind of education systems are required to prepare the next generation to resolve these threats more effectively than our generation has done. So what's the purpose of education in the 21st century? And my answer is that we need to reinvent the deep structure of our education systems so that three broad pedagogical goals are infused across the curriculum. And these goals are critical literacy, identity affirmation, and creative expression. And I'll try to give you examples of all three as we go through the session. So teaching of content is important. I'm not going to try and put that down at all. But if you think about it, for most students graduating from high school, knowing about trigonometry or the periodic table in chemistry or micro details of history is not going to affect their lives or benefit their societies on an ongoing basis. But what will benefit their societies is being able to identify disinformation, analyze evidence in support of claims, and developing the ability to communicate across cultural, linguistic, religious, and political boundaries. That is going to make a difference within a democratic society. And so the main point that I want to make is that our education system should be focused on ensuring that all students have ample opportunities to develop these skills and dispositions throughout their schooling. So I'm talking from the earliest stages of schooling and preschool right through to the end of secondary school and compulsory schooling. So if we look at the main theme, or one of the main themes of the book fair, one of the themes is the theme of space. And in its website and its communication, it says, through its theme of space, the Gothenburg Book Fair invites big conversations about modern technology, the boundaries of imagination, and the history and future of our life form. I'm not going to be talking about space up the sun, the moon, the stars, but I am going to talk about the interpersonal spaces that we create through our interactions in school. And these spaces are negotiated. And when we look at human history, we see that the goals of schools in relation to minoritized groups have often been to constrict the possibilities of identity. Students have been punished for speaking their languages in the school context, or given the message that those languages are not welcome in the school context. Cultures other than the dominant cultures are invisible. And that is communicating a message to students that affects who they see themselves as being, who they see themselves as being capable of becoming. And what I want to argue is that given the kinds of threats and realities that we're experiencing on a global basis and within individual societies in the 21st centuries, we need to examine those spaces that we're creating in our schools critically and focus on how can we expand students' sense of self, how can we expand their identities in terms of their confidence and competence in what they can achieve, regardless of what linguistic, cultural, religious, or other group they're coming from. And so that creating those spaces is what I want to talk about. So I'm trying to connect to the broader theme of the conference, I think in a way that is just as important, and probably more immediately important than looking at the moon and the stars. Okay, let's see. So first of all, I want to just take a few minutes to just do a quick survey of things that we're all familiar with. Some of the challenges and threats that we're facing that are affecting our societies and our schools. Okay. So if we look at there's some images here. One on the left there is talking about the number of book titles that have been challenged in the past year in the United States. It's gone from just a handful, like a couple of hundred over the course of the years before 2021 to increase dramatically in recent years, with communities objecting to anything that has to do with gender identification, sexuality, human rights, rights of minority groups. They're all being banned from schools in many more conservative states and school districts. If we look at the anti-immigrant sentiment that has spread throughout many countries in Europe, and is certainly very obvious in the United States amongst so-called MAGA, Trump-oriented politicians. You see an example there from a riot in England recently, an anti-immigrant riot. And then the environmental issues that we're facing, the floods, fires, and a record heat, climate disaster multiplied throughout the world. So these are realities that all of us are familiar with at this point. And yet many of these realities are sanitized away from schools, at least, and it varies from one country to another. But they are a reality that schools have not necessarily, so the issue that I want to talk about is our students are graduating into a national and global society that's characterized by multiple existential problems and challenges. As I said, we have unprecedented movement of populations, and that is likely to increase with more environmental disasters and conflicts. We have far-right neo-Nazis groups and political parties generating hatred and violence against refugees and minority populations. We have climate change and environmental destruction. We have massive amounts of disinformation that people are susceptible to. If you think about it, and think about the United States context, you have almost 50% of the United States population that is going to vote for somebody who's a sexual predator, who tells lies far more often than he tells truths, who has spewed hatred against virtually every minority or subgroup in the United States. And yet 50% of the population, or hopefully a little bit less than that, are going to vote for him in a couple of months. So these are issues that highlight some of the challenges that we face as educators. And I'm arguing that addressing these issues is just as important and probably more important than how effectively we teach content to the vast majority of students. Certainly, this needs to be infused throughout the curriculum so that people, when they graduate, are capable of recognizing evidence-based assertions from evidence-free assertions. And so the broader framework within which I'm talking is that as educators, our interactions with students are constantly sketching a triangular set of images. An image, so in other words, if we were to take a bird's eye view of all of the interactions going on in a school, we could pull out certain kinds of things. We could pull out what is the image of the teachers or of individual teachers. What image do they have of themselves as educators? I'm sure most of you here who are teachers have gone into the classroom on a Monday morning and feeling maybe a little bit under-energized and said, what am I doing here? That's a serious question. We should know what we're doing in the classroom. We should know what our image of ourselves as an educator is. But we're also sketching an image of the identity options we highlight for our students. For example, in schools that either explicitly or implicitly prohibit students from using any language other than the dominant school language within the school, that is a message to the student that you leave your language and you leave your culture at the schoolhouse door. It's a message that constricts identity options. Whereas schools that are increasingly identifying as language-friendly schools, and I'll explain this terminology a little bit later, are expanding students' identities such that their culture, their language, what some researchers have called their funds of knowledge, are welcome within the school and contribute to education of everybody. And the third image that we're sketching is an image of the society we hope our students will form. And so in order to think about that image, we need to recognize what are the challenges that our societies are facing right now. I'll go through these fairly quickly. There's obviously schools are places where a lot of the turmoil that exists in societies are spilling over. There was an article about incidents of violence in schools in Gothenburg that I pulled out. The image on the right is talking about how public schools in the United States are under serious threat with an exodus of students from the public school systems into private schools, which threatens the existence of public education. There's sanitized curriculum in many contexts. Every country has sanitized its curriculum at one stage or another. Certainly Canada has in relation to its treatment of First Nations communities. But here are two examples from the United States. The first one comes from a textbook published by McGraw-Hill, one of the major publishers in the United States. There was a social studies textbook. And in that textbook, it referred to slaves, the slave trade, as workers coming to the United States. Much more recently, in Florida, under Ron DeSantis's regime there, curriculum standards put out material that made the point that some black people benefited from slavery because of the useful skills they developed in it. So these are ways in which certain elements in the society try to whitewash the horrific incidents of their history. And I said I'm picking on the United States because I'm familiar with it, but every country has done this at one point or another to a greater or lesser extent. There's a huge fear out there amongst more conservative politicians, sometimes fueled by religious beliefs. There's a huge fear of critical literacy. And one of the phenomena in the United States has been an increase over the last few years of book burnings. So books that have been taken out or banned from public libraries and school libraries have been burned and the burning celebrated. One example from Tennessee is in the picture. In the last academic year, schools in the United States banned 10,000 books. And so people have gone through libraries, picked out anything that could be objectionable, and have tried to get rid of that. Unobjectionable means anything that might have talked about civil rights or injustices that were perpetuated historically by the society. But there's a quote here that I think goes really to the heart of the matter. And it's particularly apt in a context of a book fair, which is celebrating literacy. It's a quotation from an educator called James Moffat, who was one of the authors of a textbook series that was published in the United States in the late 70s. And this series focused on the multicultural realities. It focused on harmony across groups. It focused on what people can learn from each other. And there was major objections to this in some rural communities in Appalachia, a very economically depressed area of Tennessee and some other states. And in reflecting on that, and reflecting on the pushback against a multicultural orientation in books, Moffat made this comment. He said, "Literacy is dangerous and has always been so regarded. It naturally breaks down barriers of time, space, and culture. It threatens one's original identity by broadening it through vicarious experiencing and the incorporation of somebody else's hearth and ethos. So we feel profoundly ambiguous about literacy. Looking at it as a means of transmitting our culture to our children, we give it priority in education. But recognizing the threat of its backfiring will make it so tiresome and personally unrewarding that youngsters won't want to do it on their own, which is, of course, when it becomes dangerous. The net effect of this ambivalence is to give literacy with one hand and take it back with the other, in keeping with our contradictory wish for youngsters to learn to think, but only about what we already have in mind for them." And I think all of us can recognize that in our own experience of debates in our societies. I grew up in Ireland, and one of the realities of Irish culture and political and religious life in the 1950s and 60s was the power of the Catholic Church. And all books that were sold in Ireland had to have the approval of the bishops. And so the Nobel laureates, people like James Joyce and Samuel Beckett, were banned from Ireland. So, this is an example of sanitizing the curriculum and recognizing that literacy is dangerous and trying to exert top-down control over that. Okay, this is just some quotes from an Ontario curriculum document put out by the Ministry of Education defining critical literacy. I'm just going to go over it in the interest of time. But basically what we're talking about is a focus on being able to analyze evidence, be able to identify what assertions or claims are evidence-based as opposed to being evidence-free, being able in our current reality to recognize disinformation, and we're surrounded or embroiled in an ecosystem of disinformation, at least anybody who's on social media is, the importance of developing critical literacy is immense in terms of resisting far-right authoritarian regimes that have become prominent in several European countries as well as in the United States in recent years. So the point here is that we need schools that enable students to develop critical literacy in order to evaluate evidence and alternative perspectives and reduce the potency of indoctrination and disinformation. We need schools that affirm all students' identities by acknowledging and valuing the cultural and linguistic capital they bring to school. We need schools that create an ecosystem in and out of school context that fosters students' creative talents. And we need schools that use powerful technological innovations to expand students' knowledge of academic content, as well as their creative and intellectual horizons. And as I said before, when we look at this, individual teachers define how they stand in relation to these issues. And I'll give you some examples of what individual teachers have done. But also, it's going to help a lot if we have some top-down support that is actively fostering this kind of orientation to our schools. And I'll give you some examples of that too. So when we... Oops. Okay. So what we're talking about here is the image of the student that we're sketching in our instruction. And we can ask, to what extent are the students getting the message from our instruction that they're capable of becoming bilingual and biliterate? So a student from a refugee background or a migrant background, are they getting the message that to belong in the society, they need to give up their home language and only speak Swedish in public places? Or are other languages seen as being legitimate? There's a variety of other aspects of the image of the student that I'll go into later on if we have time. But basically, that image of the student is, I think, an important starting point for thinking about who we are as an educational community within schools, where we can look at our own instruction, our own pedagogical assumptions, and think about what are the messages we're giving to students, what opportunities are we providing. If we walk through a school and see that has 50, 60, 70% students from non-Swedish or non-English backgrounds in a Canadian or Irish context, and we see nothing on the walls except the dominant language. That is giving students a message of which languages are important, legitimate, and which are not. And so these are things that we can look at in our own practice. If we have an orientation in our school that, well, we like to do project work, we like to focus on inquiry, we like to focus on intellectually challenging work, but students who are in the process of learning the language can't do this because they have to learn Swedish first before they can engage in this kind of higher order thinking. That is giving students a message about what they're capable of. So these are the kinds of questions that we can ask that can come from looking at the image of the student that we're sketching in our instruction. Okay, I make a distinction between coercive and collaborative relations of power. And coercive relations of power refer to the exercise of power by a dominant group or individual or country to the detriment of a subordinated group. When you look up your dictionaries and you look up power, you'll find two major meanings. One is having power over somebody or exercising power over. But the other is the sense of feeling empowered, feeling the ability to do something, feeling the confidence to do something. And that's what I'm talking about in relation to collaborative relations of power. And collaborative relations of power operate on the assumption that power is not a fixed, predetermined quantity, but can be generated in interpersonal and intergroup relations. In other words, participants in the relationship are empowered through their collaboration such that each is more affirmed in his or her identity and has a greater sense of efficacy to create change in his or her life or social situation. And these happen in interactions. They happen in interactions every moment of every day in our schools. So within collaborative relations of power, the power relationship is additive rather than subtractive. with the notion of power over. If one group or one individual gets more power, less is left for the other. There's kind of a fixed quantity of power. But within collaborative relations of power, power is created in the interaction, so that when things are going right, teachers feel more empowered, students feel more empowered. And that's what we want to aim for. Okay, some examples. These two examples here came from a project that I was involved in about 20 years ago in the Toronto and Vancouver areas. And what some of the teachers did within this project, which was designed to look at alternative ways that teachers could come up with to allow students to use the totality of their linguistic resources and capital within the classroom. And what some teachers did was to engage students in writing dual language books. So the newcomer students could write in their home language, and then the teacher would find a way to get from that home language to English. And the result would be a dual language book, which would be put up in the school website and also shared with a variety of people on the web, and a hard copy printed out for the school library. So one of these was a book written by 3 students from Pakistan, Kanta, Sulmana and Madiha. And Madiha had just arrived about 6 weeks before they did this project. It was grade 7, so the students were about 13 years old. The other 2 students had arrived in grade 4, so their English was fairly fluent. But I'd like you to listen to what Kanta said when the 3 students and their teacher, or the 4 students actually, and their teacher, presented at a Teachers of English as a Second Language conference in the Toronto area. Okay. So let's see if this works.
Hi. We're going to start by introducing Kanta, who's going to tell us a little bit about herself.
Hi, my name is Kanta. I'm from Pakistan. My first language was Punjabi, my second language was Urdu, and my third language was English. I came here in grade 4, and now I am in grade 9.
How did you feel writing the book in 2 languages, and how did you see it helping you or the others?
It helped me a lot, and using 2 languages helped us a lot to understand English better. And for Madiha, who was actually new here, and then like in Urdu, if you would write, you would say 3 words. In English, you would actually have to write 5 words. So then, if you're thinking Urdu, you would be only writing those 3 words. And then, so those sentence structures didn't really make sense. But while we were doing it, it made a lot of sense to her. And then how it helped me, it helped me that when I was here, and when I came here in grade 4, the teachers didn't know what I was capable. I was given a pack of crayons and coloring book, and to get on coloring with it. And then after, I felt so bad about that. I'm capable of doing much more than just doing that. I have my own inner skills to show the world than just coloring. And then I felt like those skills of me were important also. So when we started writing this book, I could actually show the world that I am something instead of just coloring. And then so that's how it helped me. And then it made me so proud of myself that I am actually capable of doing something. And here today I am doing something like that. That I can actually show the world that I'm just not a coloring person. I can actually show you that I am something.
You can see the impact of how identities are being negotiated here. And this comes from the choices that an individual teacher made. This wasn't something that, we as researchers suggested that she do. It was her choice. And the teachers in these examples, and there are many, many more that I could give you if I had time, the teachers have become knowledge generators, not just somebody who's implementing top-down mandates from the Ministry of Education. I'm going to go through some of the rest just quickly in the interest of time. This is an example from a First Nations context where this was a small mini school, First Nations oriented school within a broader high school in the south of Toronto area. And one of the things that they did, there was about 30 students in the school. It was a high school context. They brought in a First Nations artist called Rennie Mishake, who worked with the students on visual arts, and the students reacted to the paintings that they and their peers were doing, and wrote poetry, wrote prose, wrote different kinds of reactions that they had to it. And I'll just share with you what this student, Cassandra, wrote. She said, "This experience gave me a gift of poetry. I started to develop a passion for poetry during this project. I didn't know I had this passion. Since this project, I've written and shared many pieces of poetry. Participating in this project was like having a collective voice telling me, we're proud of you, we care about you, you have a future. Being able to express my thoughts about who I am as an Ojibwe woman made me feel like I belonged and was connected to a larger community. This sense of empowerment, this sense of identity affirmation is repudiating 150 years of horrific Canadian history with violations against First Nations communities. And so when I talk about educators challenging coercive relations of power, you can see it happening in contexts like this. Cassandra goes on to say, I could take away identity, and what do you have? If you have a student that doesn't know who they are, do you think they care about what goes on in the classroom? I'll just go through this again. This is an example from mathematics where, oops, I guess it doesn't want to be missed out. There we go. Okay, well, okay. Where the teacher, rather than, he was teaching a data management unit in grade 5, so 11-year-old students. And rather than using the textbook and kind of neutral content, he had the students do a survey of the languages in the school. And that's what they did all of their data management on. This was a school with 80% of the students coming from non-English speaking backgrounds. So again, this was an identity project. Students were using mathematics to find out and to throw light on who we are as a linguistic community in this school. And you can see a pie chart with the different languages represented there. Tobin Zikmanis, the teacher, said he couldn't get the students to go out for recess, not because it was 20 degrees below, which is not unusual in Canada, but it was because they were so engaged with this. And they were engaged because it was identity affirmation. I mentioned language-friendly schools. This is Rob Di Prospero, who is the principal of Silver Creek Public School in Mississauga. This is the first officially designated language-friendly school in the Canadian context. And one of the things that Rob experienced, he said, I went into school with 2 languages and I left with 1. This is the exact opposite of what education should do. It should add things, not take away things. And if we look at our countries, look at across Europe, across North America, and how many students get active encouragement to develop their home languages within the school. And I'm not talking about teaching these languages, because that's obviously impossible when we have a large number of languages. But when they get the message that their languages are worthwhile and are given, an ecosystem is created where these languages can be shared, it's powerful affirmation. Okay. There's a couple of slides here about Binogi, which I'm not going to go into detail about, but you can see the just an example of some of the languages that are in Binogi, where students can access curriculum through their first language in addition to the major school languages. And one of the first things that struck me when I talked to Linus about this was, these are not commercial languages. What's a capitalist company developing materials in Dari, in Somali? There ain't no money in that. And the goal of this project was not necessarily to make money for shareholders. It was to help students gain access to the curriculum. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here right now. Okay, so. One of the most inspiring examples of a language-friendly school and this was implemented long before that term came into vogue. There's a school called Sculbreed in Ireland, in a working class area in the west part of Dublin. And there's a quotation here from Fintan O'Toole, who's a fairly well-known author. He's a columnist in the Guardian newspaper in the UK and some Irish newspaper. But he visited the school, and here's what he said. Imagine a classroom in which half a dozen children are retelling an Irish legend in half a dozen other languages, translating, inquiring, playing with the infinite diversity of words. What a fabulous educational experience that must be. Working class kids getting a daily course in applied linguistics that would be hard to match at university. And there's an example of what that means in practice on the slide. Okay. So, okay. Oops. Okay, I mentioned that top-down initiatives can also be incredibly powerful here. And luckily we have an example from a very unlikely place, Ireland. Inspired by what was happening in Sculbreed, which has been documented in books and multiple articles written by the principal as well as a professor from Trinity University, they showed what's possible in terms of integrating languages where English, Irish, which are taught as two official languages, and then foreign languages like French or Spanish or German are also taught. And then you've got, in schools like Sculbreed, where 80% of the students come from non-English speaking backgrounds, you've got all the multiple other languages, and they're all welcome in the school too. Inspired by that, the government in Ireland set up a number of initiatives. One of them is what they call the Languages Connect initiative, which is designed to essentially create language-friendly schools. And just one example, one of the initiatives they had is what they call mother tongues, promoting multilingualism through creativity. And that term, creativity, comes up a lot in all of these documents. And this is schools can apply for funding to bring parents in and language resource people in to talk about their languages within the school context. And this is involving parents, it's involving community members, it's communicating to students in the school that their languages are viable and worthwhile. This is one of the documents that was written by David Little and Deirdre Kieran. It's on government websites. It gives a lot of hands-on ideas about how to implement this kind of pedagogy. So the response that we get often is from teachers, well, I've got 15 different languages in my classroom. Obviously, I can't teach all those languages. I can't do anything with them. But there are more and more examples around the world that show what can be done, and what can be done is incredibly powerful. The last thing I want to talk about is creativity. And I don't know if any of you have come across a rap video created by our students, I think 10 to 12-year-olds, called The Spark. It's become a viral sensation. As of September 13th of this year, it amassed more than 51 million streams across multiple platforms, 500 million views on Instagram, and more than 1.3 billion views on TikTok. It's incredibly catchy. It was created on a shoestring, like you've got the description there that comes from the Guardian newspaper. Is cabin studios and out of school or after school initiatives set up by the government and local municipalities to enable students to do creative things. And the government in Ireland has set up an organisation called Creative Ireland that works with schools, with municipalities to enable students to do creative things. These students came from a working class area, a suburb of Cork, but also they involved students from a refugee settlement area in a neighbouring county, and the two groups together put this video together. I'd love to play it for you, but I'd be inflicting 2 minutes of ads from YouTube on it. But the links are there to the Guardian articles and to the I guess, to the video itself. But if you think, I'll just give you a sense of it. Think you can stop what we do? I doubt it. We got the energy. We'll tell you all about it. I searched for my spark and I found it. Everybody in the crowd start bouncing. We come back to the theme of space over here on the right-hand side. In my imagination, never feeling out of place, blast off like a rocket off to outer space, living large, reaching for the stars. Let them all know us kids are in charge. It's incredibly catchy. 1.3 billion views on TikTok. Okay, and just what this can do in terms of the attitude of students when they see students from immigrant backgrounds from all over the world participating in something like this, showing their creativity, composing these rap lyrics with the producer of the video. Here's an interview from a student who wasn't involved. It's called Darren Short. It's part of a podcast that was done. And I'll just go through it quickly. The question that was asked was, what do you think about the fact that this collaboration between the cabin kids and kids up from Listowel Varna, coming from all around the world, maybe some of them fleeing war, coming to Ireland to be safe? And the student, who's 15 years old, says, it's inspiring, dude. Like they fled their country, they're in a bad place, like to give them this opportunity. Every time I see them, they look so bright and cheerful, and genuinely, they're amazing kids, and I wish the best for them. And the interviewer goes on to say, over in England in recent weeks, and definitely up in Belfast, there have been riots, some people protesting against immigration. And I guess this is showing a different, like a positive side towards the potential that immigrant children in particular can have. Do you believe that this can be a powerful message? And here we've got a 15-year-old showing really clear critical thinking in terms of what's involved here. He says, yeah, like, do you know, the people looking at the negatives of it, they're just ignorant. These kids have done nothing. So to take it out on the kids, it's bad. I feel like people just blow it out of proportion because it's unknown and it's not familiar to them. Like when one person, they're not familiar with it and they just decide, yeah, let's hate everyone who looks like him or who are from the same country. It's disrespectful to say that as an Irish person. We fled the country after the famine. We went everywhere. America, England, Australia. Like we were the biggest immigrants at one point. And we were welcomed with open arms. These people are coming, they're working, they're providing for their families. I don't see a problem at all. And if you ask me, if you're hating on these immigrants, bro, you're not Irish. It's that simple. And I think it is that simple. And so just to wrap it up, we come back to this. If you think of this image of the student and think about critical in the center there, the deep structure that should be infusing our curriculum, our interactions with our student should be infused with a focus on critical literacy, infused with a focus on identity affirmation, and infused with a focus on creative expression. And I think we're preparing students who can genuinely address some of the issues that our generation is creating for the next generation to resolve. So thank you.